Thank you for such a lovely welcome. Before I start, I want to say a sincere thank you to everyone here for the incredible support that myself and my colleagues have got over the last number of months, and for Freedom of Conscience over the last number of weeks. It is heartwarming, encouraging, and so positive. So we know we're not alone. We know that there are many of you out there supporting us, and for that we're deeply grateful. Freedom of conscience. Hippocrates, father of medicine, has given guiding principles almost 2,500 years old. Primum non nocere, do no harm. Part of the classic oath, I will never give a deadly drug to anybody who asked for it, nor will I make a suggestion to this effect. Similarly, I will not give to a woman an abortive remedy. Powerful words indeed. No matter what the law of the land states, we will not forget these guiding principles. Today, when a GP heads to work at the start of a new week, he or she enters their surgery with the intention of healing, not harming, with the intention of preserving human life, never ending it. We are being asked to change all of that. Not asked, but coerced. The Minister for Health broke the news to all healthcare workers throughout the media, or through the media. Not by meeting with GPs, nurses, midwives and pharmacists to discuss our concerns, reservations and opposition. Instead, he presented it as a fait accompli on the airwaves. The government, I believe, knew full well that doctors were not ready and willing to end the lives of unborn babies. They knew the answer they would get if they sat down with us, with nurses and midwives, to discuss this issue. So instead, they decided to make the decision for us without consultation. They know to this day the depth of opposition among medics that exists over what they are doing. They have seen the GP Buddy survey showing that of the 936 GPs who took part, well over 1/3 of all GPs in this country, 75% are opposed to the GP-led abortion regime. And they're hearing the same from lots of other quarters daily. As most of you know, the debate on the abortion legislation concluded last Thursday. The first vote on the bill took place in Dáil Éireann today, after which the bill will go to committee stage. Just this afternoon, I've heard the result, and many of you here may know the result. 102 voted yes, 12 voted no, and 7 abstained. It is indeed an unpalatable result and a sad day for Ireland. But I also look at wonderful, courageous politicians who have stood up for life. We know them. We know who to support in the future. And at times of crisis like these, we also see such wonderful heroism. There is no issue more important than speaking up for life and freedom of conscience. That will never change. Every day the numbers keep growing in opposition to the government's abortion bill among healthcare professionals, as doctors and nurses and others are beginning more and more to realise how the new law will impact on them. The sooner that sinks in, the better, because we will keep going until freedom of conscience is fully respected and proper safeguards are enshrined in law. Like so many of my colleagues, I too became a doctor to protect and respect the dignity of every human life and to make life better for people. That principle has not changed for us. At present, there is no positive right to conscientious objection in the government's bill. There is none. There is a pretend freedom of conscience clause, and they are okay. But nothing that sincerely protects the healthcare workers' rights to conscientiously object. Martin Luther King had a famous quote, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter." If ever there is something that matters and is something worth standing up for, human life is it. 1/3 of the electorate agree with us. 734,000 people in this country voted that every life is worth protecting and everyone deserves a right to be born. What happened to the other 2/3 of the electorate? I have asked myself, do they actually understand what it is that they have voted for? Do they really know what happens to a baby in an abortion? Do they want to know? Or have they just followed the crowd and not really thought of what they are voting in? It's interesting, even though the 8th Amendment was repealed by a margin of 2-1, the RTE exit poll on that day revealed that barely more than half of voters, 54%, believed abortion should be available on request in the first 12 weeks. 46% of voters believe that abortion should not be available on demand. So there is far less support for what the government is proposing than the result of the referendum would seem to indicate. I truly believe many will come to deeply regret their decision when they see the true reality of what happens to mothers and their babies in time. But until that time comes, we will continue to do everything to protect life, every life. We support healthcare professionals, not just doctors, but nurses, midwives, pharmacists and hospital staff, porters, receptionists, so that we can work to maintain pro-life staff in all of these areas. This is really important going forward. If we think about it, imagine over the coming years, or even less, if all pro-life doctors and nurses and pharmacists are removed, and the law ensures that anyone with pro-life views will not go into these areas of medicine, then our problem as a nation gets bigger. Society becomes increasingly secular and anti-life, and pro-life views are kept out of areas of these traditionally caring professions. Medicine as a caring vocation is turned upside down. We are not going to be used as pawns to normalise the taking of innocent human life. We will keep going until freedom of conscience is fully respected and proper safeguards are ensured in law. General practice in the healthcare system is, as we all know and see, in tatters. There is a shortage of GPs, a serious shortage, due to get worse in the coming years. Dr. John O'Brien of the Irish College of GPs, the ICGP, estimates that 60% of practices are presently closed to taking on new patients. I think we all see this. It's longer to wait to see your GP. It's impossible to get into any new practice. There is no capacity to see more patients. In the coming 10 years, many more GPs will reach retirement age, and so the crisis may indeed get worse. General practice, it seems, is bursting, and yet our Minister and Taoiseach, with support from a significant section of government, still feel the need to coerce doctors to act against their conscience and force them to partake in provision of abortion services, or face being struck off by the Medical Council and possibly criminalised. Do we wish to drive caring family doctors to emigrate or leave the profession? Because in Ireland, freedom of choice apparently only exists for pregnant people. Today, as I mentioned, the vote in the Dáil took place. The bill then goes to the Health Committee, and from today amendments can be submitted. We will be asking for an amendment to protect freedom of conscience, which is not protected currently under the bill, as it forces doctors to refer to somebody who will end the life of their patient. There has been a lot of talk about compassion and choice. What about compassion for doctors who want to continue caring for women and unborn babies, as we have always done, and not risk losing our jobs because we will not end a life? I feel my choice to protect life is certainly not being respected in the present climate, and in the face of the pretend freedom of conscience being offered. What are we looking for as doctors? We propose an opt-in system and a 24-hour helpline. Women can have easily identifiable abortion clinics that they can attend when they ring this 24/7 helpline. Doctors who wish to take part in providing abortion are free to do so. And it's interesting, as part of the poll that was done a number of months back, 11% of doctors only are happy to take part in this opt-in clause. So of all the medics out there, there's 11% of doctors willing to partake in abortion. The rest don't want any hand or part in it. What the government is proposing at present is an attack on human freedom and the right of an individual not to be forced to participate in something that goes against their conscience and everything they believe in. We have suggested the New Zealand model to the government. It seems we can only do this through the media channels, as they refuse to meet us. The New Zealand model has numerous GPs who have full freedom of conscience and have no hand or part in abortions. They have a 24-hour helpline, and they have doctors who have decided to opt in to provide abortion. Health Minister Simon Harris claims that freedom of conscience opt-outs are fully protected in the government's proposed abortion legislation. This does not stand up to scrutiny. It compels those unwilling to perform a medical or surgical abortion to nonetheless establish contact with a colleague to ensure the abortion is carried out. There are lots of personnel, as well as medical and ethical reasons, why some doctors don't want to be coerced to refer women for abortions. I know of one GP who came under immense pressure from a fellow medic to abort her baby with Down syndrome. She resisted the pressure, and now she has a beautiful daughter that's the apple of her eye. She knows only too well how little regard some people had for her daughter's right to life. And she has no intention of becoming the kind of doctor that she herself encountered when pregnant. Yet Simon Harris believes she, along with other doctors, should be compelled by law to arrange for an abortion to happen every time a request is made for one. This really is something unspeakable. Every time a request is made. There doesn't have to be reason, just a request. And he wants to compel us by law to comply with this. Imagine if a patient asked for a treatment for a lung or a cardiac problem. A tablet maybe that somebody had researched online, and this happens a lot. If the tablet was unsafe and likely to cause him harm, he comes to me as his doctor. I would of course explain why the tablet is not suitable, but ultimately I would refuse to prescribe it. How can we as doctors be forced to prescribe what we know is harmful to any patient, including pregnant women? Those pushing this legislation through seem to ignore the facts that abortion can often be harmful and regretted by women, especially women in crisis, who are pushed into it and given little action. We need to be free as doctors to advise women that this is not the best option for them. As we know, the government's draft legislation defines abortion as a medical procedure which is intended to end the life of a fetus. The intent here could not be clearer in describing what is being sanctioned. And it doesn't matter how many times it's proposed as healthcare, intentionally and deliberately setting out to end the life of an unborn baby is just that, ending the life of a human being. It is nothing to do with genuine healthcare. The journal.ie, certainly not a pro-life journal, did a poll. Should conscientiously objecting GPs be compelled to refer for abortions? The results are interesting. 2% don't know. 37% said yes, GPs should be compelled. 60% of the general public said no. I think it's clear public support for true freedom of conscience for doctors and healthcare professionals is indeed alive and well, despite what the government and media portray. The GP buddy poll that I mentioned earlier, do you think abortion should be GP-led? 75% said no. 52% of the GPs in this country will not prescribe abortion pills. And 22% of GPs in this country will not refer to a colleague who will. So the 22% of GPs represents about 500 GPs in this country. And that's very significant. 500 GPs, not just one here and one in Cork and one in Kerry, 500 GPs. And that's a conservative estimate. And if you think that each of these GPs likely will have a list of 1,000 patients under their care, that's 500,000 people that may well be left without GPs if the government have their way. It's clear people do not want their GPs compelled to act against their conscience and to be potentially forced to leave general practice. I looked at the Irish law and the European law, and again it's very interesting. From the Constitution of Ireland, it states that the dignity and freedom of an individual may be assured and sovereign right to choose its own freedom of conscience. You look at the European Convention on Human Rights, and since 2003, the European Convention on Human Rights has been incorporated into Irish law and is directly enforceable in Irish courts. Rights protected by the European Convention include the right to freedom of thought, religion, and conscience. Our minister is forcing us to become involved, to refer, to assist, to make arrangements, and go against our freedom of conscience, which is our legal right in Irish and European law, as shown above. This law was tested in Norway very recently, and the result is so encouraging. Back in 2015, there was a Dr. Jakimovitz, I'm sure I'm pronouncing her name wrong, but nonetheless, she lost her employment in a general practice clinic in Norway. She had refused to insert what's called IUDs, intrauterine devices, which can act as abortive fascias, because administering a procedure that could result in abortion contradicted her Christian faith. International law protects the right of medical staff to conscientious objection. Nonetheless, the staff she worked with, her superiors in the clinic, fired her because she failed to comply with an instruction that she considered to be morally wrong. A lower court found that she had acted within her right to practice medicine in accordance with her conscience. but the healthcare authorities appealed the decision. The case was then heard at the Supreme Court of Norway at the end of August of this year. She won her case. This win is so encouraging for us here. It provides a valuable legal precedent in protecting the inherent freedom here and across the continent. It sends a clear message to all that conscience is a fundamental right under the European Convention on Human Rights, which must be protected. We are encouraged and heartened that no matter what the state says, we have the law in Europe and Ireland to back us. I want to mention something that's been happening over the last number of days. A group called the Doctors for Freedom of Conscience have sent a letter to the ICGP, that's our governing body, Irish College of General Practitioners, because we felt they weren't representing our views, and we as members are entitled to that. And so we wrote, the regulation of termination of pregnancy bill is now the subject of legislation. It is therefore crucial that the concerns of all general practitioners be reflected in this process. Otherwise, there is potential for lasting division regarding abortion provision in Ireland. And so, we proposed 5 suggestions, or motions. To get these motions to what's called an extraordinary general meeting, we needed 350 signatures. This started probably 3 or 4 days ago, and we're already at 300. So we will get 350, almost definitely. In 3 days, if we've got 300, with 50 more to get, we're on the road. And so when this happens, we will then call the extraordinary general meeting of our representative body, and we will put the following motions to them. Now I'll just summarise them here, but the crux really. The first is that routine general practice is not the appropriate setting to deliver an abortion service. And we want a setting outside of general practice. The second point, we're looking for an opt-in system, similar to what I mentioned earlier, where GPs who want to deliver the service can opt in and become involved. And they have to be audited in keeping with standards of governance. The third motion that we will put to them is that the body, the ICGP, support the right of all doctors to the effective exercise of freedom of conscience with regard to abortion, including no obligation to refer patients. The fourth point, we call on them to state that those doctors who choose not to opt in, which according to us seems to be the vast majority of GPs, will in no way be prevented from providing any other service to women, nor will they suffer any disadvantage in their career, either as trainers or practitioners. And this point, I think, is very important with regard to trainee doctors and students coming up, that they cannot be discriminated against. And the fifth and final point, we talk about a 24-hour helpline, which should provide access to non-directive counselling, rather than merely signposting to providers. And if this comes to pass, it puts huge pressure on the government to consider our proposals. Before I finish, I want to mention a film I saw recently, and a number of you here may well have seen the film also, Hacksaw Ridge. It was a film based on a true story. It was directed by Mel Gibson and was set during World War II. It wasn't for the faint-hearted, as some of the battle scenes are quite graphic and bloody, I suppose the sad truth of war. Desmond Doss is the main character, and he was an army medic in the film, and he was the first conscientious objector to be awarded the American Congressional Medal of Honor. Doss, a Christian who enlisted in the army to serve his country and to protect his fellow countrymen during World War II. Due to his religious beliefs and convictions, he refused to hold a gun, and he refused to kill his enemies. He stood very alone and had no support from his fellow army men, and several in his platoon called him a coward. Ironically, he went on to save over 75 of his fellow soldiers on the battlefield. He returned to the battlefield under heavy fire oftentimes to attend the wounded, drag them to the cliff edge and lower them down to safety. Another part of this true story, which wasn't in the film, and I think Mel Gibson passed a comment that he left it out because he felt no one would believe that it was true. Doss was injured when he tried to kick away a grenade from himself and several other American soldiers. 17 pieces of shrapnel were embedded in his body, especially in his leg. He was put on a stretcher and he was being returned to the army base. On the way, he gave his stretcher to another soldier who needed it more. He slid to the ground and told his fellow army men to take the more seriously wounded soldier instead. In actual footage of Desmond Doss at the end of the film, he says, "I was praying the whole time. I just kept praying, Lord, please help me to get one more. Lord, just help me to get one more." His life is truly inspirational. And we need to look to inspirational people who fought and fight for the lives of others in difficult and challenging circumstances. Something that now is facing each and every one of us in these times and the times ahead. Desmond Doss was once asked if he was ever tempted to take up a gun, and he said, "I knew if I ever once compromised, I was going to be in trouble. Because if you compromise once, you can compromise again." No matter what happens with this bill, we will continue to fight for every life at every stage, from conception to natural death. We are reminded, as Albert Einstein says, conscience supersedes the authority of the state. God is indeed in charge of all things, and we know that in the end, God will triumph over evil. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
We might take a moment, you may wish to stand up, or indeed maybe for 5 minutes to collect a cup of tea or coffee and bring it back in, if that's what you so wish, because I didn't even see the cups coming in, I came up so fast. So just we'll open up the doors for a minute, the fresh air, and get a cup of coffee and bring it straight back, and that will give you a bit of a chance at yourself.
Coffee is out there.
Yeah.
People actually love it. Somebody's whispering behind me, working off that money, not there either. And the summary is your book still hasn't arrived, but Father Sean has one for you. It's out on Thursday, probably in the evening. If
I was trying to get John to come, but he was actually the bishop sitting there. As the bishop sitting there. He's all
Probably made sense that
How are you, Barry? I knew you'd be here. Support the it's hard to taking on this tablet.
grass is still going, right? Grass is still growing. What?
Yeah, I didn't hear her. Ella was saying it. Like you need to be 40 TDs, 30 right next to you. I had a board. I know, yeah. People were seed up to their eyeballs.
John, can I buy you a cup of tea?
Silent screen.
All right, see you again.
Maybe in 2 weeks.
Brendan, you have one.
Then they would vote first. You know? That's it. Ronald Reagan showed the centuries in America and changed it. And abortionist, the fact that he became abortionist was very changed.
Well, I think between the start of the year, and summer.
One sugar, a little milk. How about that? Thank you. Well done.
When you come back at the point, I don't think they'll see me again. I don't think so. We've gone separate ways now. Just, you know, life goes on, people take different paths, different directions. Life goes on, they go to Cancer Man, I go to Medjugorje. This side of the text. Huh? I think I am. I'm getting some text in here. You pick the better up. Format though, I think they can have some other changes, so this type of, I think it's
They used to have it in the bigger room. Maybe
How are you? Well, John, isn't it? How you doing, sir? Yeah. What's your first name again? You're doing night fever next Saturday, aren't you? Night fever. I'll see you there. Talk soon anyway.
Did you do the vigil there last Saturday?
How are you?
Yourself, you can organise yourself. Makes a change for one person. It went to Granville. St. John. I think it could be upon another, like in Kilkenny and places like that. See, I went to Kilkenny, so I think it happens in Kilkenny. There's up in registration.
maybe not.
You'd be going to Rome. He's only there for about three months. Well, I don't know really, no, I know very little.
That's it.
It's like a year. You need a year at least. You need a year at least. A bishop has to be for a year at least before you can kind of get an idea how things are going to go. A year at least. 3 months.
I'm not sure what we're going at today. We do we keep making mistakes and we find out what's right anyway. We can't stop, like, you know. The government do what they're keeping doing.
True.
They're trying to hit on it, aren't they?
Yeah. You remember?
I know you have to do that too. Sorry.
You would put out your leg, wouldn't you? I spill this
Try it. Even the try to it.
busy. Well, very busy all the time. Yeah.
What?
How's your mother? Good. Say hello from me.
So you're got to view my camera there.
Kirsten and Barry. Yeah, was the dad. They came forward to be father. Great. One of the right.
Thank you very much.
My sister's had it.
There's always a few students in the class. Usually the gentleman down So we'll open up for a conversation now, my friends. Again, always, so everybody gets a chance who wish to speak, that we just keep it concise. And that's a bit hard for Irish people, sisters, you know what I mean, to keep it concise, because we have this lovely language of expressing ourselves, isn't that right? This woman said, let him at it, isn't that lovely? So now, just indicate with your hand, and I will just, you know, let you know when you're next, just to keep it all moving just nicely. So is there, look at this, the first man in the back.
Yeah, so I was just wondering if supposing it goes through the way it's been proposed by Minister Harris, and you know you're a doctor and you're saying you're going to take you've got a conscientious objection to referring, which obviously I would agree with. What would you say the outcome would that would be for you? Just giving yourself as an example, or a doctor, you know, if a patient, would you be reported, and then what would happen? What would be the next step, and now the step after that? What do you think could happen?
An excellent question, because I think we always hope that an amendment will be put through, but it is quite possible that it will be railroaded and the bill will go through as it is. So I suppose, you know, you've a couple of scenarios that way. In time, or at some point, it is likely that there will be a challenge and it will be put to the law. I think how quickly or not that will happen, you know, who knows, but I think in time that's very likely to happen. So whether it will be in a situation maybe like the bakery, that it's almost, you know, a setup, that somebody will come in knowing your stance on it. And, you know, I mean, on radio today, I think, you you know, Ciara Kelly was saying to me, well, you know, why can't you put your name forward that you won't do it? And I just said to her, well, I'm a National Airways, so I think everyone knows that I won't do it. So, you know, there are people, and there's Dr. Brendan Crowley, I know his Uncle Father Crowley is here, he will be the same. He is in the radio, he's on the TV, so he is known. So, you know, it's not going to be difficult to pick a doctor that you know will not refer. And at some point it's likely that as a setup or not, that somebody will come in and be annoyed that they will not be referred, they will not be accommodated in the kindest, most compassionate way that we can do that. Now I mentioned, I suppose, about the law, because I think that to me is really positive as it stands at the moment. And that doctor in Norway, she won her case. And if that happens, I suppose, then it turns everything back to front a little bit, and the onus goes back on the government that now they have to change and provide a true freedom of conscience option. But that's not without the stress and the strain and the legal challenge that goes with it. But my own opinion is that at some point that's likely to happen for some healthcare professionals.
Thank you. Lady here.
I'd just like to ask Kirsten, what about if the GP practices put a notice on their waiting rooms for their patients saying, we do not facilitate abortion or referrals, or put it on their window, and then the patient, whoever wants it, won't actually come in and face you, they know it before they even come in.
I mean, it's an option, I suppose. A lot of the practices now are group practices, and going forward in the future, I think there's going to be more and more group practices. So rural practices with and GPs are dying sort of situation, really. So within a group practice, there's usually mixed opinions. Now, again, I think going forward on a lot of this and areas like this, it may well be that a few Catholic doctors, a few pro-life doctors may need to come together and form a practice, you know, as a protection. But as it's structured at the moment in each of the practices, there's a mix. So I think it's not likely that there will be an agreement to put up a sign that we will or we won't commit to that. And really, the best way forward, I think, for us is the New Zealand model, where doctors have to opt in. You see, what happens, I suppose, quite interestingly, and human nature is such that if the government put it to doctors without the opt-in clause, some doctors will just go along with it, unfortunately. Whereas if you have to put your name forward to doing something, the number of doctors that will do that would be much smaller.
So are you actually saying then that even within a group practice,
yes,
that each individual doctor does not have freedom of conscience to operate?
She said they do.
Well, I think you won't have an agreement in a group practice to put up a sign that we will or we won't. I think that's unlikely unless you have like-minded doctors that you're working with, and there's such a mix out there. So I think that would be unlikely to happen. And I would prefer to put in an opt-in clause that GPs who want to do this put their name forward. I mean, why should we not put the onus on them? They put their names forward. Why do we have to advertise that we're not happy with this? I mean, the other thing is, if we do that, we're wide open to being targeted. And you know, now as I said, some of our names are out there, and that doesn't matter. But you know, you're thinking about the junior doctors, the trainee doctors coming forward. You're trying to protect them as best you can going forward, so that they continue to go into the area of general practice and obstetrics. You know, because otherwise, I suppose you just have pro-abortion doctors in those areas, which is not what we want.
This gentleman here.
I think the government in Harris probably actually see the writing on the wall regarding the issue of conscience, and they would probably draw up, you know, rules and regulations or legislation, probably too strong a word, and then we will be discussing their proposals. So would the doctors not get their proposals in first, so that you are first on top of the list? And secondly, if it all starts to go haywire, I mean, to concentrate minds, and you have a large number of doctors and nurses and other health workers in the country who, we all know the issue of conscience, right? And set up your own union. I mean, if your own medical council have threatened you with whatever expulsion or being expelled, they're not very good, you know, they're not representing us.
Well, I think this I suppose ICGP extraordinary meeting that I'm talking about, that pushes them, if we get the 350 signatures, to represent us. So, you know, in the end of the day, I suppose you have some prominent doctors who fought very much on the repeal the aid side in the ICGP, and I think that's what's happened there. They've sort of, I suppose their voices are being heard. So we get this number and it pushes the ICGP to take on board our views and represent all of their members. I mean, they're going to represent the other side. We know that.
Just the last thing, I mean, a year ago, 9 months ago, the flavour of the month was bullying. Bullying in schools, bullying in the workplace, bullying, everyone's a bully, right? So everyone understands freedom of conscience, and if Harris is not actually acceding to your sort of requests, he's a bully, and you should be putting it out there that you're being bullied. You know, your conscience is being bullied, you're being bullied.
I mean, the issue with all of that is that he won't meet us. You know, he talks about meeting doctors, and you know, the doctors that he's met kind of aren't saying, you know, you're on your own now, you know, this sort of language. But he's only meeting the doctors from the one side. So I mean, we've gone to meet him. We were in the Dáil a few weeks ago, and he wouldn't come and meet us. We were outside the Dáil last week, and there was, I mean, 2,000 supporters, and I know many from here. You know, he wouldn't come to meet us. So I suppose he won't engage with us. So we're giving him our suggestions. We're telling him the model that we want. But we're trying, the only way we could do it really is through our representative body and through the media, however hostile they are, and through the public support and the polls that are done. So, you know, I suppose this is what we're using. And it's definitely working to some degree, because I think there's much more awareness amongst the public now. And actually there seems to be support. And I've had people who said, you know, I voted yes in the referendum, but I recognise that you should have the choice too not to be involved in this, and I don't want GPs to have to leave their area of medicine. So there, you know, there is a reasonable tolerance there. Might seem like it all the time, but you know, it's we're almost 2/3 of the public, I think, backing us for freedom of conscience, which is good.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joe. I gave areas education, and very much enjoyed your submission. Just in two areas, maybe you could maybe answer for me. You know, given the Hippocratic oath in that sense, you know, does it not, you know, especially, and by the way, I'm pro-life, but you know, does it not see like that it's discriminatory against women as well? And you know, in the other area, maybe that if there's you know, freedom of conscience, should there also be freedom of choice?
Freedom of choice for doctors to provide services, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
But there is that, and I mean we're very much saying as a group, you know, doctors for freedom of conscience, that we respect the doctors that want to provide this service. We are not standing in their way, but equally in providing respect for them, we're asking for the same respect and choice back. So, you know, this isn't a rerun of the referendum debate. This is an issue that's arising, and it's going to have implications for society as a whole. I mean, this isn't about women, this isn't about, you know, whether you're pro-choice or pro-life. This is about society, because in the end of the day, what's being proposed is ultimately, you do what I say or you get out. And I mean, you know, what kind of a democracy is that? Do what I say, or I'll strike you off and I'll haul you before the courts and you can be criminalised because you want to act according to your conscience. So, you know, as I said, across the board, for every area, you know, I suppose for now we're talking about freedom of conscience for doctors, but it isn't just about us, and it's certainly not just about this issue. It's about what kind of democracy we want to live in. I mean, the dictatorship tells you, do what I want you to do or get out. And the democracy allows for all members of society to act according to their conscience.
But is there also freedom of choice for women itself, like in the sense of their, you know, decision of their own bodies in a sense?
I suppose the the view that every doctor has actually is that we want to provide the best care for our patients. The crux in what you said there is that every pregnant woman that comes through my door, I don't have one patient, I have two. So I don't regard it, I mean, I have been pregnant and I have children, and every time I was pregnant, I didn't say, this is my baby to do what I want with it. I mean, this is a gift that I've been given from God, and I'm very grateful. And I'll do my best to be a good mother. And that's my view. But it's, I suppose, you go back to a doctor, not to be judgmental, but there are two patients. And in the end of the day, you know, abortion, it kills one of them. So, and I have seen, I'm 20 years qualified as a doctor, and I have seen such pain from women who have had abortion, such regret, that for me to turn around and say, you know, off you go and have an abortion, and I know that she may well suffer tremendously in the long term from that. What kind of a doctor would I be if I said to her, you know, I'm not going to try and help you? And I mean help her, not just for a quick fix, but for really something long term that doesn't cause pain. And my view is that abortion actually hurts women. There are two victims. The baby dies and the woman is left absolutely traumatized. I hope that answers your question.
But I think you can think about a larger picture in the sense of what the
It
society
is. It is, and we do have to respect freedom of conscience for everyone.
The gentleman right here.
Yeah, I want to ask you the Hippocratic Oath.
Yes.
Do doctors actually take it?
No.
Right, so why is it so significant now? If they're not taking it, shouldn't they be taking it? And can I just explain something? I was up in Hermitage Clinic recently. They had part of the Hippocratic Oath, that's a whole lot of it up.
Yes.
No referring to abortion. So many doctors twist it and have different versions of it. But shouldn't they actually take it? Is it discussed in medical college even? Or is it just sort of somewhere in the background?
Yeah, a really good point. I think that has changed over the years. So I suppose I'm qualified 20 years, and I can speak from my time, I suppose, doing medical ethics in the university. It depended on who was teaching medical ethics and their view of right and wrong, and that varies very much from college to college. And the Hippocratic Oath was there in an adjusted form. And you're correct, it didn't mention abortion, but it did mention do no harm and to do good. Above all, do no harm. We were told that, each of us were given it, and we were told it is up to you if you want to read this and use this as your guide. But I suppose, so can we enforce and bring it back? I think it's unlikely that the colleges now will allow it to be used in any other way other than an option for students that want to take it. But I would say that many doctors did read it, and we refer to it because the guiding principles in it are as valid today, more today, than ever before.
But maybe it shouldn't be called an oath anymore. It's not an oath, was it?
It was an oath. I mean, it remains the Hippocratic Oath, and it's not obligatory. But the principles in it are absolutely fantastic. And I read it, and I would stand by it, and I suppose it has served me well in my practice in making decisions.
Thank you. This gentleman here.
Yeah, just I'm surprised that the medical council would strike you off, like if, say, you were challenged. And the other thing is, I reckon myself, like, that what's going to happen is, as soon as this bill goes through, in whatever form it is, that Mary Stokes or somebody will be in here providing service anyway. So I think it would have to be a case like the bakery, where somebody would vindictively seek you out, like just to...
Which is quite possible.
Yeah, yeah.
I think your point on the Mary Stokes or clinical abortion providing clinic coming in is quite I think a reasonable expectation. But the government very much want GPs to cover this for the first 9 weeks of pregnancy, and I think after that, then, yeah, you know, you're talking about it's going to be hospitals or clinics coming in, and I'm sure they're ready and waiting because it is about money for them. But I think the push is very much in the first 9 weeks. Because, I mean, to date, the relationship between doctors, GPs and their patients, it is a very good one, and there's huge trust there, and I suppose the government knew this at the time of the referendum, and by suggesting that your GP will take care of it, it certainly put a very cosy slant on it, and it was misused. And I think they will still push for that, but I think outside of that then it is quite reasonable that the clinics will come in. To be struck off with regard to the Medical Council, anytime anyone makes a complaint, you will be hauled up before the Medical Council to account. And if the law has been broken, then I think it's quite reasonable to expect that we will be struck off.
But that would be notwithstanding the fact that the Constitution has the protection.
Well, that's where the discrepancy lies. But I mean, I would imagine that Simon Harris and the government pushing this must have got some legal advice. So, you know, it's the case in Norway is fantastic because it clarifies things for us. You know, so very recently, but at the same time there's some legal advice being given to the other side, and I think maybe that's why they're saying, look, you have a pretend freedom of conscience, so you don't actually have to do it yourself, but referring well, you know. So yeah, it's I think it's a battle to be fought and won.
Absolutely.
Gentleman down the back.
Hello, Paul Slater. I'm a student of business pro-life, and really enjoyed your talk. Just on the precedence of the Norway case.
Yes.
Is there any talk among the medical, you know, yourselves, that you're talking about, like, if it was to happen here, any scenarios, if someone was struck off, what would be the likelihood of cases being brought forward, and if so, how long do you think it might take to gather momentum and to get a referendum to stay heard?
I suppose we've been very busy really with regard to fighting, putting all of our time into fighting this, because at the moment the amendments are there to be made. So, you know, this battle isn't over yet. But there has been a significant conference or meeting with the medical people and the legal people. So they have already come together and formed an alliance with you to exactly what you're talking about, so that I suppose each doctor is protected as best can be, has the support of the pro-life legal team, and then in January we meet again. There will be another conference. So I suppose at that point the amendments will be completed, if there are any amendments, and we come together in support. But where it's going to go from there, I mean, it's difficult to know, but absolutely we're aware that we need to work very closely with good legal people, because it is likely in time to come to that. I mean, the other interesting thing we're talking about amendments, I mean, we also need to be watching very carefully about what the pro-choice people are looking for amendments. I mean, the 3-day waiting period is something that they have in their sights, and you know, so we have to work very hard to keep that in place, you know, because waiting periods, you know, they do help. I know in one country, I think they did a study in 3 abortion clinics, and there was a 3-day waiting period, and I think it was 3 or 4% changed their mind. So look, it's, as I said in the story of Desmond Doss, it's just one more. It's about every life counts.
Thank you, and the gentleman here, and then yourself.
Am I entitled to know what way my own GP thinks, and if so, how?
No, I mean, you're not, but a lot of the time patients ask GPs, you know, and sometimes the GP may tell you and sometimes they won't. But you're not entitled to force him or her to tell you. But I really think it will become very apparent in time. I don't think we'll be in any quandary. It's a bit like our politicians. You know, I think we have a few wonderful politicians. You know, and Father Cody this evening, I mean, he's inspirational, and he may well be removed from the party or suspended from the party, but you almost feel that, look, he's better off away from them, because he is such a strong guy, and as an independent he will do very well. So I think it will become apparent in time, but at the moment we have to wait on that one.
Thank you. And gentleman at the back.
Yeah, no, but it strikes me that most GPs surely are self-employed,
Yes,
and therefore you have to submit tax returns. Well, the governor talking about spending 12 million on abortions using taxpayer funds, right?
that's right.
So why couldn't you propose to have a tax strike?
No, it was very interesting. There was a doctor in America who withdrew, I think it was $1.36 or something like that, many, many years ago in protest that he didn't want his taxes to pay. He ended up having to leave the profession and leave the country. And then I think there was a new law or bill or amendment made, and he was able to return, and I think he lived to a good age, into his 90s. You know, I suppose my view has always been, you know, we abide by the laws of the state, and that is genuinely a good principle, apart from when it comes to issues of conscience. So on the tax and the money, you know, I think it's for one person to do it, it could be very difficult. It would be something that really collectively one would have to do, but I think for me the concentration is very much on that we provide care for every patient that comes through the door, for every unborn child that comes through the door. We continue to do that irrespective of the bill that will be put forward, and you know, if we just keep doing that, and then we'll have to take what comes. But there are hundreds of good GPs out there who want to do this.
Thank you. And the gentleman here.
Two suggestions, you might just shoot them down if...
Yes.
A number of years ago, in Garda Síochána, who were banned from striking, went on for their blue flu. If there was something where the doctors were to feel unwell when the patients arrived in, and I need to get my cert from a third party, could that work? The second suggestion that I would have is that a covert pro-life doctor, say, could be referred to when a patient arrived in. Certainly, yeah, and your waiting period is 41 weeks. Try and put her name down. Please shoot them down or let me know what you think.
Yeah, no, look, it's and there's always lots of suggestions, and all suggestions are welcome. I suppose doctors are kind of a funny breed, and that we don't ever take days off, and we would go in, you know, with the swine flu and spread it rather than take the day off. Unfortunately, I suppose it's ironic. I would think it's unlikely that they would ever not be there for their patients, because that's just the nature of what we do. But I do think that, you know, more and more, as I said in the talk, that there's definitely momentum gathering, because the penny is starting to drop with people, with other healthcare professionals. You know, pharmacists as well are starting to come up to us and say, you know, we're wide open. You know, what are we going to do? Because you know, where do we go? So I think our strength comes in unity, actually, with the public, all the healthcare professionals, because numbers talk. We saw that in the water disaster, you know, my water charges, and so strength comes in numbers, really.
Thank you.
So, Kirsten, the New Zealand model.
Yes.
Does that have any reference to, like you just mentioned, pharmacists and that kind of thing? How do they work there? Because I know that sometimes they have to provide the abortion drug for genuine miscarriages.
Yes.
And again, how does that affect you as GPs for genuine miscarriages? And also a second question as well. If I did hear one TD say that, oh, you know, the conscientious objections would be fine, because what's going to happen is, yes, you know, they'll be asked to refer, but if they don't, it will just be like if you had an abortion in the past couple of years, it will be illegal, but we won't say anything to you. Are you willing to put up with that kind of a...
Yeah, well, you know, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, there's significant hostility on the other side,
yeah.
So I think, you know, that they're going to say, oh, you're fine, and we'll just sweep it under the carpet and we won't talk about it. It's probably unlikely, and in the coming years I think sometimes hostility grows a little bit, because remember, when we're not referring, I suppose, we're kind of speaking volumes without speaking at all,
Yeah.
and it sometimes, I suppose, it acts on other consciences, sometimes, and so, you know, people can get angry about that. So in time, I think it's likely that they will want to single us out and do something about it. But
Doctors have been very aggressive about
they are.
She on Twitter even. They've
They
been
are.
very, very aggressive about
They
how
are.
much pressure he would put on them.
Yeah.
even already.
The Start Doctors are a group of doctors in Munster, and they want to, I suppose they're pushing very hard for getting the abortion service up and ready, and that really that we need to cop ourselves on and refer on and just get on with it. But equally, I mean, you know, they can be as aggressive as they like, but they're not going to move our stance on it.
Yeah.
I
I mean, it's painting them in a terrible light as well.
Yes, so, you know, and this is the truth in society, I suppose. We have all views, and we have, you know, all views and none, and in a democracy we respect our conscience, that we're not going to do certain things. And I suppose that's the real thing. It's about giving choice to us. I mean, the people have spoken in the referendum, and I think, yeah, it is. They voted for choice, and I think, as Simon Harris said in the celebrations after it, choice has won, and so it's sort of logical then that choice is given to everyone. So I think that's what we push for. You mentioned about the New Zealand model. I think what happens, and this is our view for here, and it's why we're very much looking to the New Zealand model. If doctors get it, then it seems to permeate to other healthcare professionals. And I suppose that's the advice we've been given as well, that we need to push extra hard for us to get it, so then it automatically then filters through to the nurses and the pharmacists and receptionists and porters and, you know, and everyone involved in this. And it's interesting in New Zealand, I mean, they have a liberal abortion regime, but there seems to be a tolerance for doctors who want nothing to do with it. And they seem to have enough doctors who opt in to provide the service for those who want.
Okay, I will come right through here to yourself, Lex.
Yes, so it's just a comment really. It seems that if there's enough of you, you would have the leverage against the government anyway, because if you stick together and, you know, you're cohesive, because if enough of you say, I'm not going to do this, they can't send you all to prison, like, you know, like, I know they'd like to, but
that's exactly
particularly the point you made earlier, that there's a shortage of doctors, and so it seems that you do have a lot of leverage from my perspective anyway, and you should use it and be organised and use it well, you know.
I think, again though, sometimes, and this is true of us all, sometimes if you're so busy doing your work and then your family life, you almost just, you let it go and you don't take things on, and that's something that GPs as a whole are probably very guilty of, that they're just so busy just working and doing their job and whatever, that they tend not to get involved in anything political or anything moral or anything. They just tend to do things. So that's our weak point, really. The shortage of GPs, I mean, that's a serious point, and it's almost, you feel that the government and Simon Harris, that they're sort of not thinking this through, even on a practical point, even if their view differs to ours. They surely don't want 500,000 people left without GPs. But yes, unity is the big thing. If we can motivate, there's some very, very motivated GPs and healthcare professionals, and then there's always some that maybe are just a little bit more lukewarm.
Maybe you should get someone to, you know, maybe not even a GP, but to organise you in a campaign type of structure that, you know, you keep the pressure up there, not,
yes.
You know, I'm just,
it's
just a comment really.
To be fair, I suppose we have fantastic help from the Pro-Life campaign and Love Both and Life Institute, so we're, because they're used to doing this, we're not used to running campaigns, and so they're really there to support and advise us. You know, they have been fantastic, so we're lucky in that.
Okay, gentlemen here.
The 700,000 people who voted no are not to be ignored. 700,000 plus, right? So that's an ally that you have, and at the right timing, an open letter to those 700,000 people from the doctors, you know, if stuff is not going well for you with the government, I mean, an open letter with political input,
Yes.
because if that 700,000 desert Fine Gael and go elsewhere, Fine Gael will pick it up on the ground. I would absolutely use those people, not use the wrong word, but get their assistance and disperse them elsewhere.
Yes.
You know, when you're dealing with politicians, you have to get down and get dirty, into the gutter.
We're learning that, and you're absolutely right. I mean, 1/3 of the electorate is a huge number. And absolutely 1/3 of the electorate want pro-life doctors. You know, and we do say that, but I think you're right, probably has to get out there a lot more. And maybe, you know, we consider an ad on one of the national newspapers, because the one thing the politicians absolutely value is their place in the next election. So, you know, that's what we use, that's important.
The lady here.
Yes.
Thank you for taking this on, you know, as GPs there and just coming out there and just...
Not at all, I'm in a very lucky position that I'm able to do that, so I'm...
But I think, as you said earlier, like this conscience thing is out in society now, because we're all taxpayers. And our money is going to fund abortions.
Sadly,
that's the reality here.
Sadly.
So, like, there's blood in all, going to be blood in all our hands. You know? We are funding this. And we voted against it, we didn't want it.
I mean, yes, it's horrendous, and we would love to withdraw that €1 or €2 or whatever it is. And I suppose that, you know, that's a discussion people have to have. Is that the right way to go about this? Blood on our hands.
Why does it have to go like taxpayers' money?
No, I agree, but I mean, I don't feel there's blood on our hands if they take it out of our taxes, to be honest, okay? I feel there's blood on our hands if we do nothing, and I feel there's blood on our hands if we don't fight this.
Yeah.
But we are here fighting this, we are fighting this, we are using every tool that we can, and I suppose that's what we can do. You know, I mean, God doesn't expect the impossible from us. He just expects us, you know, every day to keep doing.
Ongoing, though, I think.
Yes, but that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, when I'm old and grey, maybe it's ongoing. You know, with the next generation, but that's what we do, and we don't lose hope, because you know there is always hope, and we will win in the end. But I mean, look, absolutely, and I mean the biggest thing, and keeps coming into my head, I mean, we are the church militant. We are the church militant, and that doesn't mean we're aggressive or we're anything, but we are fighting. We are in fighting mode, be it in prayer, be it out there, you know, on the radio, be it outside the door, be it whatever we do, whatever we are doing, be it talking to people quietly and encouraging them to do the right thing. So we don't have blood in our hands. We keep on going. Prayer. If you pray, then you don't have blood in your hands. You're doing the right thing.
Thank you. And the gentleman in the front.
Hey, my name is James Byrne.
James.
Similar to what Mick was saying there, you know, like you're looking at 350,000 names. Is that like handwritten names?
350 names.
Oh, 350.
So it's surprisingly, the number of GPs in this country is quite small. We've just shy of 2,500 GPs.
Okay.
So it's not a big number.
I was getting mixed up.
Yeah, no, and that would be tall order. But so the 350 names though, at the same time, you know what I've mentioned earlier, GPs, some are just lax and asleep and they're busy and you know they don't want to get involved. But within the space of I think it's 3 or 4 days, we have 300 numbers.
Okay.
You know, it's fantastic.
No, so I think in general about keeping the numbers up, about keeping in touch with all the pro-life people.
Exactly.
Like Mick was saying there, just yes. Great.
No, and you're right, I suppose we really do, you know, we have to have meetings, we have to talk, we have for coffee, we have to encourage each other on, because although alone, you know, we still have to fight on, but actually when you're not alone, I mean, how much easier it is. It's just, it's much more encouraging, and you kind of feel much more positive that even if we're the minority, that there's a lot of us to keep doing this.
Thank you. And you?
Thanks, Dr. Hill. You know, it's not directly involved in that, but it is a question that seems to gone into the back burner a little bit. What do they propose to do with the remains of the babies that are aborted? I mean, they're bringing up about Tuam again, they come up with
Absolutely.
it's
Heard
ridiculous
it.
today.
13 million.
Road delight. It just doesn't seem to feature. I think it's
They,
something.
they won't answer, they won't answer that. When that has been brought up, you're sort of very quickly, well, we have to deal now with the bill and but look, they won't even meet us, so that doesn't say volumes. No, absolutely, and this is where, when we talk about freedom of conscience, this is exactly what we're talking about. Porters are involved in this. Nurses, staff booking people in. I mean, my children and my grandchildren, you want them to be able to choose to go into whatever area and whatever profession that they end up in, and so it's a huge issue, and this is why it's definitely not just about us. It is about everyone. It's about society.
Thank you. Hi, Kirsten. Hi, Kirsten. I'm just wondering, in cases where you'd have a patient coming in for the morning after pill, are you adverse to that, or in cases will you give that?
Okay, that's a completely different topic in a sense. Okay, and I was asked that today on the radio.
But I'm just wondering, with your conscientious objection, does it go that far, or?
Well, it goes as far as life begins at conception. So that's where it starts. So anything that will interfere potentially with life from conception on, would have to be a problem for me, because I would be hypocritical if I said, well, I'm okay with it up to 2 days after conception, but I'm not okay with it then when the baby is 2 weeks or 4 weeks. So, I have to be consistent, I suppose, in that. When I am asked by the media, and I was asked today, with regard to referrals in general for lots of different things, and I suppose I was speaking on behalf of the Doctors for Freedom of Conscience. So my answer was that we have one mandate, and that is freedom of conscience with regard to the abortion regime and the bill that's being proposed. Because
so if you were referring someone to a sexual assault unit, you'd be happy the care they would get there, except being offered the morning after pill?
Okay, a lot of the time they end up being there before they see us. Actually, a lot of patients seem to know, and they go directly. What can very easily happen is we can be sidelined to discuss a different area, and then the whole, I suppose, emphasis on what we're actually trying to do is lost. I'm sticking with what we're trying to do, and what we're trying to do is to protect healthcare.
Life is a lot brighter than that, but
no, and I do appreciate life is black and white, and it's absolutely great, but I suppose for me, you have to understand conception, and even Peter Boylan, who's very pro-choice, as we know, accepted that life begins at conception. So if life begins at conception, which we know that it does, then anything after that is an abortive accident. So, and that I suppose isn't great. That is quite clear for me.
But debating it is clear. Debating it is not great. It needs to be not debated.
I think we can get distracted, and we have to do what we need to do.
No, we have to stay focused.
Well, no, I'm giving you my answer. I'm giving you my answer, which is very honest and very clear. I think when we're out in the media, you have to be very clever, because otherwise you're distracted, and then you don't get to talk about what really is going on. But my answer to you is very genuine. Anything after conception is an abortive accident, and I would be very careful about what I would do, and and I cannot advise and I cannot partake in that either. So that's where it stands.
The gentleman here.
Dr. Fuller, thank you very much for this evening. It's been very touched on undertaking these questions. But just two things. I have a question and a statement. The statement is that while 700,000 people voted against abortion, another 1 million people didn't vote at all. And maybe there is a conscientious objection there as well. Okay, so it's not all lost. Secondly, I'd just like to ask a question. Are there any other countries in the world where GPs give out abortion pills and commit abortions? And secondly, why is Ireland, if that's the case, why is Ireland a special case, and why did the government go down this road? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, excellent points. There is no other jurisdiction that I know of that abortion service is GP led, and we have tried to make this point. And this is why, again, in the poll, you see the vast number of GPs that just, this is not what they want to do. So, you know, 75% of GPs saying that it shouldn't be GP led. But remember, we're not being consulted on it, so the government are making their decision and railroading it through. Why are they doing that? I think I probably partly answered that in that I do genuinely think that the doctors and the medical profession in the hospitals and GPs have a really good trust and rapport with their patients, and I think that's been taken advantage of. And it was used to get in the yes vote, and now maybe it's used to ease a conscience. I'm not sure. GPs across the board with their different views on this, I mean, they have enough, for practical reasons, they have enough on their plate. They don't want to get involved in this. And the other risk that happens, you know, if a woman has regret after an abortion and the GP has prescribed the abortion pill, I mean, that relationship is going to become very strained. So for so many reasons, GPs don't want to do this, but it seems that we, at the moment, our say is restricted. But again, with our meeting, hopefully, with the ICGP, these are the points that's our first point. We want it outside of GP practice. So if the support for that is huge, then our body goes forward, you know, hopefully with much more power than it has done to date on that.
Okay, thank you.
I was thinking about, you know, the harnessing of public opinion. Now, two speakers already have touched on this, that there were the 700,000 who voted no, there were all the people who didn't vote, but of the 2/3 who voted, I am convinced that at least half of them were not voting for abortion. Yes. They were voting because they were led to believe and frightened into believing that the medical people's hands were tied by the amendment, and in particularly difficult cases. I saw that in I saw it firsthand in a number of cases where there had been difficult practices, and they were all voting yes, but they're not pro-abortion. There were people who had been frightened, you know, by that. And I think that there's a huge number of people who are there to be harnessed, their opinion and their backing to be harnessed.
No, and a very valid point. I think we all agree that people voted for many different reasons, but a significant proportion felt that women's lives were at risk, and they wanted to do something about it.
I had an aunt died at 36. Some of the family would say, had there been an abortion, her life would have been saved, and the 3 children's mother would not have been taken from them. They all voted to get rid of the thing now. They weren't voting for abortion, you know, but they were frightened into believing that kind of thing, you know.
Thank you. And the lady in the corner here?
The new bill legislation that's being drafted at the moment.
Yes.
What could we, what can we do to give our opinions or be?
I suppose there's 2 channels really that we try and get our opinions. One is the media, so writing letters, contacting the radio, you know, and there's debate on. And I suppose through our public representatives would be the other channel to get our opinion out there. So through those that we have voted to represent us.
Yeah, and really go and visit their clinics.
Yes, and email them and ring them so that they understand. I mean, you know, they have a mandate from the people that elected them.
Yeah, we need to, in other words, we need to let them know, I'm living here in Waterford and you're my representative, and I'm expecting that you're going to
yes,
have your say.
Work hard to do this, yes.
Thank you.
Can you determine with accuracy when conception occurs?
You can never be exact to the second or the minute, but I suppose with natural family planning and with changes in the body, women will often know within a reasonable, I suppose, 24-hour period. So I suppose, well, 24 hours before and 24 hours after, so 48-hour period. But it's difficult to be exactly accurate. So if somebody was to say to me, well, I'm sure I won't have conceived today, you don't often know. And the problem also is that many women don't really know their cycles very well. So they wouldn't be, I mean, when I'm talking about with reasonable accuracy, that's for somebody who's really quite trained to do it. So many women, they will know to some degree, but they won't know in detail about the changes in the body. So, you know, it's difficult. There's a few days on either side that you could be right or wrong.
We don't want to know where our parents agree. Just a quick one. And, out of the 300 signatures you have so far,
yes,
how many would be from different fields of medicine? How many GPs?
No, that's just GPs. That's just GPs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're because it's the Irish College of GPs that we want to represent us. So it's only GPs for this, and so it's only a few more to get.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry?
Gentlemen, then yourself.
Okay.
Read the last two.
Following the demonstration outside the door last
Yes.
week, right, I read all the national papers. There were no reports in the three bigs, and there was no reports in RT. What kind of effort did the doctors make to engage with the media beforehand in terms of press releases and do you actually have yourselves a media-focused committee?
Yes, we have a media section. So all of the usual media channels knew that protest was on. They all knew about it. They were all invited to attend. And before the referendum, we would have had to make almost a smaller effort, and bigger numbers of media would come. So they blanked us out that day. I mean, there were about 2,000 supporters there at the protest outside the Dáil. It was huge because it was midweek. But there isn't any doubt in my mind, the media just blanked us out. They didn't want the general public to know what went on. They didn't want them to see the support that was actually there. And again, if you just, I suppose, you think about it, this is just support to allow doctors to exercise their conscience. You know, it's nothing more than that, but it's a genuine support. So from no matter which side of the fence people are on, I suppose is it not a reasonable thing to ask, I suppose, in the era of choice, that we're afforded the same. So yes, the media they were all very aware, but I suppose, you know, and I often think about social media, but thank God for social media, because it was spread significantly through social media. It was good.
Okay, and we have one more here now on the right side.
You may have heard David Quinn making this point last Saturday, that there's one organisation, for instance, I mean, you were, as an organisation, you want to, as a matter of conscience, to refuse to deal with somebody who wants to basically kill the unborn child, right? But there's another organisation which is allowed by the state to say, and this is, I'm talking about the Gaels Governor, right?
Yes.
They can refuse to take in pupils who have no, their parents are not Irish speakers, they have no interest in the Irish language, and they can say you can't take you in. We'll only take in pupils who will be committed to the Irish language, because that's our raison d'etat, right? So surely there is, a comparison here where the state is acting in one way and refusing you the same rights.
Absolutely, I suppose, and I think David Quinn, his point was that you have to look and see the irony in what's happening, that, you know, in the Gael Scoileanna, that they're allowed to give precedence to those parents that are, speaking Gael at home, and logically you would turn around and say, well, it's a Gael Scoileanna, so I suppose that there's a sense in that. But look, that is the irony of what's happening, and that is the utter, I suppose, again you point out, the 2/3 of the people voted for choice, and by the same hand just deliver choice to everybody, and don't force us to do something that we don't want to do. So it's you know, it's a simple argument in a sense, but it's a very logical one. But look, that's where I suppose sometimes truth can get a little bit muddied and mixed up in it, and we just bring it back to that again.
Truth is gone, it doesn't exist anymore.
Well, it's a bit muddy, but we you know, at the same time you express the truth, and it is that, it remains that.